You're listening to Interchain FM, the Cosmos radio station. If you're seeking alpha in the cosmos, look no further. I'm your host, Shango Unchained. I'm here with Siko Neitz from Moonbeam. He's the ecosystem development lead there. And yeah, we're going to cover everything about Moonbeam and the latest updates. Welcome to the show, Siko.
Yeah, hey Django, really nice to meet you, and thank you for having me.
Excellent. So, just to give our audience members a little bit of background about Moonbeam and yourself, can you go ahead and do that? I'm sure almost everyone listening is going to be familiar with Moonbeam, but just to give a
Sure.
high-level comprehensive overview, that would be great.
So we're a layer one parachain on Polkadot. Polkadot, I think, somewhat similar to Cosmos, is kind of this ecosystem of blockchains, right? And then each individual chain is kind of called a parachain. The parachains are secured by the same underlying relay chain for validation, but each parachain has like its own set of collators. Moonbeam brings.
Okay, wait. Before we keep going, this is because the nomenclature is so idiosyncratic,
Of course,
and
100%.
people are going to get lost with that. So, okay, context is Polkadot is the layer 0 because
Right.
Polkadot it's the base layer. It's being used for shared security for
That's
the
right.
parachain. So in Cosmos speak, that would be equivalent to the Cosmos hub providing interchain security for various ICS chains. And he's calling the interchain secured chains the layer 1s. But in Ethereum land, they're called layer 2s, but effectively the architecture is just exactly the same.
Yes.
Right. And then in Ethereum land, Ethereum is obviously the base layer, the layer 0, or the shared security chain. If you're using eigenlayer, then the AVS modules would be the parachains, and so on and so forth. We
That's
really
right.
need to standardize.
Yes, I know.
And your collators are validators, right? They're just validators.
They do produce blocks, right? So they're basically producing blocks and then back the blocks with transactions. The underlying relay chain is what handles validation. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I need to brush up on the Polkadot architecture.
That's
It's a little bit
That's good.
slightly different. Oh, they're
Yeah.
the block producers, right? And then
Correct.
the
Right.
people who actually finalize the blocks are relayers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We're done with that. Go ahead.
Oh, good. Yeah. So at the core, Moonbeam brings EVM compatibility to Polkadot. So Polkadot typically, like parachains are written in Substrate, which is a less known I think kind of development framework. So from the beginning, Moonbeam,
Cosmos SDK, but specifically for the Polkadot ecosystem.
Correct, right. So Moonbeam brings EVM compatibility. So you can take a smart contract that was built for Ethereum, you can deploy to Moonbeam. It'll just work. We have all of the same tooling, so Hard Hat, Truffle, same level of ecosystem support. So like Chainlink and Etherscan and all this kind of stuff. A big part of our focus has been on kind of historically has been on like interoperability. So sort of believe that the future is multi-chain and that once you kind of accept that applications will end up deploying to multiple chains, then like interoperability becomes a really important part, right? And so that's been a really big focus on us and ensuring that we have kind of a wide breadth of sort of bridges and general message passing protocols that people can use to do that kind of interoperability. That's moving at like 30 seconds basically, right? So maybe a minute. So I mean, in terms of myself, yes, I'm head of ecosystem development. My responsibility is both business development. So I have a couple of business developers, BD guys that are working for me. So we're sort of trying to manage incoming requests for grants or co-marketing. We also do outbound, so we try and go find teams that we think are compelling and that would like to integrate into Moonbeam. I also oversee grants, so we do have like a grant program. And I mean, in terms of my own background, I mean, I'm a little older, turning 50 this year, but I have most of my career has been. I mean, actually, all of my career has been in tech. Originally as a backend Java software developer, I also have 14 years experience in like sort of senior management of engineering. Like I've led large distributed engineering teams, and I've been with Moonbeam since we launched basically. So yeah.
Well, awesome. Congratulations. So there's been a couple of things that are in the works for Moonbeam that are rather exciting. That includes a rebrand as well as a large grants program.
I mean, at this point, like Moonbeam's been live for a little over 2 years.
It felt longer than that.
No, we launched beginning of 2022. I think I think both the look and feel was up for like a little bit of a a little bit of a refresh and renewal. So I mean, obviously it's still called Moonbeam, but we've kind of kind of evolved the logo. I think there's kind of a new look and feel for the website. Trying to get some attraction that way. I think that's kind of a means to an end to really kind of get attraction to some of the exciting stuff that's going on. So one, we've kind of announced just like this new roadmap, where we're kind of not really shifting focus, but I think maybe just kind of refining now that we've been live for 2 years and kind of seeing how our cross-chain like story plays out. I think we've kind of realized that we want to really kind of focus on reducing like user friction, right? So I think when you think about Web3, there's still a pretty tall like learning curve, and I think a lot of kind of friction that people have when they start getting into Web3 and start using it. And I think people sometimes forget that, right? Once you've been in the industry for a while, you just get used to like dealing with MetaMask and transaction hashes and stuff like this. And I think people sometimes forget a little bit what it was like when they got started. So a lot of our roadmap is kind of aimed at like kind of making it easier for developers to build applications that are more user friendly, right? We're launching this like new innovation fund, $10 million innovation fund focused on gaming and real world assets. We think those are like some really significant growth areas in the space. So a couple of areas that we've been really focused on over the last year or so. We're also, kind of launching new ecosystem grants for like our DeFi ecosystem because, whether you do gaming or RWA or Deepin or any of the others areas, I mean, you still do need like this sort of like base DeFi layer. And then, basically we have, we're basically planning like a whole bunch of like marketing and promotional activities around this. So yeah, so I think, a lot of stuff. It's very busy right now. I think we're like all hands on deck. So yeah.
Forgive my ignorance. If I recall correctly, Moonbeam I had thought it was a DEX, but turns out it sounds like it's mostly an EVM compatible parachain that is a superset of DEXs and other things, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, at this point, I mean, in terms of what's on Moonbeam, I mean, we're generally considered, I mean, I hate bragging, but like we're generally considered kind of like, I think probably the premier Polkadot parachain. We have over 300.
I think I mean, let me just like, say it from the outsider. You're the only relevant parachain on Polkadot. Let's just
Okay.
let's
Well,
just keep it at that.
fair enough. So we have we have about 300 applications deployed. I mean, I think when we started building, we were very focused on kind of, I mean, DeFi is it's a foundational building block, right? For anything in Web3. So, we were kind of very focused on like attracting DEXs and lending protocols and, automated market makers. There's a perps platform now. But then simply from that, I mean, yeah, like, we have, NFT marketplaces, we have, a whole bunch of games that have deployed, and, we've been really kind of growing that kind of stable over the last year. We have a lot of traction in Brazil. It's a lot of, kind of what I would call like social fi or like loyalty program type applications. RWA is kind of a big piece for us. So so I think at this point it's a pretty extensive ecosystem. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And when you say RWA in Brazil, what specific real world assets?
Yeah, so some of the stuff that we're seeing, I mean, I think with RWA, a lot what you're seeing is kind of like tokenization of traditional financial assets, right? So think like, for example, like a traditional investment fund where maybe there's like a minimal entry ticket, right? Like you need to have a minimum of like $1 million in order to be able to get in. So I think those tend to kind of have like better performance. So we've kind of working with some projects that are essentially doing all of the legal paperwork and so forth to be able to buy those assets and essentially create an investment
so kind
pool,
of like
so
kind of like an on-chain fund.
Right, essentially, right.
To be able to invest in these things that typically
right.
other investors can't get access to.
Right. But we are seeing other use cases. So I think one that is pretty interesting, which I think is kind of maybe a little bit unique to the Brazilian situation, is this project Tokeniza. Brazil, like a lot of, I think, Latin American countries, there is at times like some economic instability, right? So, and I think, one thing that's happened is there's this kind of pattern that's arisen where people will take, for example, like a teacher union, right? Will take the government to court over failures to pay salary, and then the courts will assign damages to the teachers, And then, but then the government's remiss in even paying out those damages. So then what happens is those get put into like a kind of a special fund. It's called the precatorios. And then, if essentially like the teacher's supposed to be able to withdraw over time from that fund. Now, there is sometimes people are skeptical that they're actually going to be able to get that payout, or sometimes people just need money now. So what happens is that there's this secondary market, this organic secondary market that's arisen, where like let's say you're a teacher, government owes you $10,000. You're like, hey, I really need to pay these bills like next month. I need money right now. Okay, I come in and I'm willing to buy that from you for like say 30 or 50 cents on the dollar. You have money right away. I essentially have a guarantee, a hope on a higher return. So that's a pretty common practice that started to happen in Brazil, and so
So what happens
Tokenisa
when you
has
live in a
basically
low
taken
trust
that and put it on
society?
chain. Sorry, what's that?
I see.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, it's what happens when you live in a low trust society where like people, like it's better than over here because people at least understand that they can't trust their government.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think there is kind of a lot of it is interesting, right? Because when you think about like sort of Europe and North America, trying to explain Web3 to like just the average person in the street, it is sometimes a bit of an uphill battle because people are like, well, I don't really worry about my bank kind of keeling over, right? Generally, when I go to the ATM machine, like my money's there. When you talk to people in Latin America, like
They know.
it's a much different conversation. They know, right? And so they're like way more willing to kind of experiment and like kind of adopt these new technologies, which I think is great. It's exciting. I mean, I think it potentially sets them up for a scenario where, from a technology point of view, they could kind of leapfrog like like North America and Western Europe. So yeah, so I think it's a
Yeah,
pretty
I would
interesting
agree with
development.
that.
And I think something like Tokenese is kind of an interesting example of that. So yeah.
That's interesting. But yeah, that's an example of a use case that is great for like a specific locality.
Right. And other things we're seeing is like, yeah, so like, we've recently kind of approved this grant for a project. What they're doing is, so they're basically, putting on chain, solar panel power generation. So I think the use case is basically, imagine you're living in Rio de Janeiro, you're in an apartment, you would like to like offset your bill by getting solar panels installed, but you don't have a roof, so you can't put it anywhere, right? So what this team has done is like they've basically partnered with like a number of energy providers. They have these like in situ, like they're very close to Rio. They have these like large solar panel farms, and so you can buy fully on chain. You can basically buy these solar panels, and they then have partnerships with the underlying power generation companies where you'll actually get a credit on your bill, or you can like resell the power, or I mean, and so I think these are all like I think really good. I mean, we have CO2 offset programs. I mean, there's stuff like this. So I think what we are kind of seeing there is like, yeah, like people are coming up with some like pretty legit use cases where like, yeah, people are finding ways to use blockchain technology in real life, basically, right? And
Sure.
where it's not just like speculation, basically. So I think I think we're pretty excited about that.
That's one vertical that you guys are tackling. Are there other examples?
Yeah, so I think gaming's been like a really big focus for us. I think gaming's an interesting one. I mean, I think gaming is kind of like a very natural fit, right? I mean, it's all digital to begin with. I think and I mean, I'm sure you've heard this countless times before, but I think a lot of people that are gamers, and I'm a gamer, they are comfortable with sort of using fiat or like financial assets to buy in-game items, right? To buy virtual items. So I think I think that's one use case. I mean, it's the one that everybody's talking about. It's like sort of the ownership of digital assets. I think there are other opportunities there. I think the one that I'm quite bullish on is like governance over gaming itself. But so there were like a number of like homegrown games on Moonbeam, but I think in the last year we've really done a big push to try and kind of grow that sort of game. So I think the challenge a little bit when you're going for gaming is that gaming studios have really two problems. Like one, they need capital investment up front because building a game is a very capital intensive, expensive, lengthy process, and so you need enough money in order to be able to get to playable beta or like a go live. And then once they are there, then they need people to play the game, right? So I think when you go for gaming studios, the challenge a little bit is that you need games to get games. So I think in absence of that, everybody just flocks to Polygon or Immutable X. because there's already a ton of games there, and so people kind of figured like, oh, we're going to get cross pollination, right? If somebody's already trying a game on Immutable X, like, well, then they'll try the other games there too. So I think for us the challenge a little bit was like getting kind of those first couple of games in to get some credibility, but then like now, like this is kind of like rolling pretty steadily. Like, I mean, we're having people like reach out to us and come up to us at a trade show and saying, hey, like Moonbeam's a gaming chain, and we'd love to work with you guys. So one thing we're doing is like, yeah, we've announced this like innovation funds. So we're kind of hoping to do some investments in both gaming and real world assets. As the first part of this innovation fund is this partnership with Nemus. So they're a company kind of aimed at like building gaming infrastructure. So they've built, and a lot of it is like it aligns philosophically with the way that we're kind of thinking about it. So they're also very much focused on this challenge of like bringing mainstream gamers, like essentially growing the user base, right? Bringing mainstream gamers into Web3. And if you think about it, I mean, from a gamer's perspective, like I don't want to have to open MetaMask and like or create a MetaMask account and then like every time that I'm playing the game, pay for gas or pay for transaction fees or any of this kind of stuff. So Nemus has kind of built a system where you can log in with just like a social account. Under the hood, it creates a custodial wallet, but there is a way for you to take over the private seed phrase and get control. And then they have an SDK that like integrates directly into the game, so that at no point like you basically just authorize the game once, and then at the point where like it needs to make financial transactions, like it automatically comes out of that wallet without continuously presenting you with like a pop-up. And so from an end user perspective, it just feels like you're making if you think about a role-playing game, I'm paying with gold coins, like I'm not like sort of getting popped out of the immersion with like a MetaMask dialogue window, right? So we're pretty excited about that. I mean, I think we're pretty excited about this partnership because we think that's kind of a key foundational block to kind of improve user experience. They have kind of like a game discovery service similar to Steam or to Epic, where they're listing various games that on the other ecosystems too, but including Moonbeam, and we are kind of working with them on building like a tournament system as well, where we can kind of basically like try and like incentivize users and attract them. And we think that'll really help, right? If you can go to a gaming studio and say, hey, like not only can we give you financial support, not only can you give me co-marketing and technical assistance and all this stuff, but we'd also in a given moment via this tournament system kind of put a spotlight on you and get a couple hundred or 1,000 gamers to come try out your game. Whether you can retain them, obviously the game has to be fun, but we can give you that shot. I think when you play that out with gaming studios, like that works really well. They're like, yeah, you're kind of hitting it for us. You're hitting both notes for us, right? You're helping us with financial support, you're helping us technically, and you're helping us with user acquisition. So yeah, for us, this is kind of makes a lot of sense as the way that we're thinking about kind of our business development strategy.
Obviously, if you try to put every in-game action on chain and required approval for every movement, that's untenable. But if you constrained it to just I guess it would be the NFT marketplace for your in-game assets, like, I don't know, a sword or your gold coins or whatever, then anytime you need to make a financial transaction by, let's say, going to a storefront to exchange gold coins for like a shield or something, then that's the only time that you would make an on-chain transaction. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's one example. I mean, I think, let me turn your question around a little bit. I mean, I think, when I think about it as a gamer, I think it depends a little bit about what type of game you're playing. If you're playing a turn-based game, then yes, I could see every transaction somehow being on chain because
a turn-based game like Final Fantasy VII or like Pokemon,
right, or Civilization 6 or like any one of these, right? But if you're playing like a shooter, right? Like, I mean, I'm the monitor that I'm using right now. It's a gaming monitor. It's got a 5 millisecond response time. Even on the fastest chain where, I think Arbitrum gets like, what is it, 0.25 seconds. From a gaming perspective, that's an eternity, right? Like nobody's gonna accept like a game where like I hit the virtual trigger on my gun and it takes a quarter of a second in order for the bullets to fly. So I think for that, yes, studios are still experimenting with what the right model is for Web3 gaming. But I think for that, yes, you are kind of more looking at, kind of in-game assets being on chain. I think there are other things like, I think, so for example, like leaderboards, like results, you could imagine like game results, like you could imagine that's on chain. I think the one and I mean, I mentioned this, like governance, I think would be like a pretty interesting one. So the balancing of its game itself, or sort of key aspects of like game design, or imagine if the game had like an in-game council that, for example, gives you a casus belli to attack an opponent, and like, but that actually becomes like a, you know, an on-chain vote. I think, you know, there are these like ways that I think you could kind of weave governance into the game experience. Are we going to continue to see games that try and put everything on chain? Yes, I think some studios will continue to try that. But I think most studios that we're talking to, they've kind of realized that, you know, what they're really looking for is like some sort of hybrid model where, you know, use blockchain technology for those things that make sense, and then for things where like you need very low latency experiences, you know, you're using, you know, more traditional, like, you know, gaming services.
I would assert that blockchain technology is best applied to things that require censorship resistance, and
Yep.
for the most part, fortunately, I can't really see too much of a need for that for games.
But if you think about, so for example, I think there is a very strong argument for decentralization in gaming, right? So
Of
any
game production and and IP sharing.
yeah, I was more thinking like just like interaction with the users, right? So if you think of any multiplayer game that has some sort of competitive aspect, if you go to the web forums for that game, the number one thing you're going to hear is like, you know, the game's not balanced, the developers are not listening, you know, the gamers, the players themselves know better what's needed. But you know, we don't have a voice. All we can do is kind of shout about it on the forums or leave with our money. That to me has like Web3 governance written all over it. I mean, the very concept, the core concept of Web3 is like decentralization is not one central entity kind of deciding the kind of direction or future of a project. And so yeah, like giving gamers a table at, you know, table stakes would, I think, would be a pretty powerful you know, use case. So yeah, so.
Aren't there mods? Like, aren't there ways that people crowdsource
There is,
game
but then
development?
yes, I mean yes. So that is one way that you can kind of do it. But then, so the problem with like mods is like they always have difficulty. Like, I mean, there are exceptions, right? So like Counter Strike is actually a really good example of an exception, because Counter Strike did start as like a Half-Life 2 mod. But by and large, mods have difficulty. You know, it sort of fragments the experience, right? Everybody then starts playing with different mods and so forth. And so I think there is sort of a desire for like, you know, maybe like a shared experience or a shared game worlds where, you know, but that is kind of like governed by the community, or where like at least the community has like a significant say. So yeah,
Sure.
so I think that'd be a pretty compelling use case. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Um, yeah, the thing that I was trying to touch on was, and this is a conversation I've had with many Web3 game developers, is the notion of like the Hollywood effect, for example, right? Where
Yep.
if you're trying to create a movie in this day and age, you have to go through the gatekeepers, which is Hollywood.
Yep.
And similarly, in the gaming industry, you know, I'm not too familiar with the gaming as an industry, but there are a handful of really big companies you can name, like Blizzard, that really are kind of almost the gatekeepers, or rather gatekeepers by default, just because the barrier to entry to build the game
Yep.
from scratch, bootstrap a game, is very, very high. Whereas with crypto and the crowdsourcing ability that crypto gives you, it almost democratizes the production of games for
Yep.
an indie game developer. Theoretically, people who own shares of the game could then vote on what they want, and then it feeds back to the developer, and they could integrate it or not. What's important is that they get to first crowd fund the game and then build the game from scratch without having to go through all the usual channels of and struggle with funding and then bootstrapping the game for like 5-10 years, even without any beta, right? Because it takes just that long to
Yep.
build a good game.
I think you're exactly right. I think that is kind of how I'm thinking about it, where for many of the same reasons as with Hollywood, right? You need this massive capital upfront investment. So then what happens is the people that have the capital and bring it, they become very risk averse, right? So it becomes this sort of appeal to the
and
lowest
that's
denominator, guaranteed
yeah, and that's how you
success.
get a repeat of the Marvel model.
That's how you end up with 28 Marvel movies, and like nobody wants to experiment. And I think you see the same with gaming. That's why with Activision brings out, I mean, I've lost track of how many Call of Duties there are, and every game is like a copy carbon paste of the new one. And I do think there is like gamer fatigue with that, right? I think, you know, people want to see you know, kind of more, you know, newer and like exciting titles, which is, or at least experimentation, which is why if you look at the last 10 years, some of the most successful games have been kind kind of like more indie games, right? Like think of like Fortnite or Valheim, or Palworld is like I think now the latest example. And yeah, and I think blockchain can be a powerful way for gaming studios to kind of fund early development, and then also give the people that are kind of crowdfunding it give a stake in the direction of the game, and force accountability. And yeah, and so I think those are things that we're kind of thinking about. I mean, I kind of mentioned early on, we have this new roadmap. One of the things that we are thinking there is how can we better create so Polkadot has like very powerful governance tracks that are kind of intended for the parachains governance. We think those are actually kind of assets, and like so we're trying to think about, okay, like could we expose those to developers, where like developers could kind of create like take some of those features and and then leverage them for different use cases, right? So for example, for a gaming DAO, or for like more decentralized governance over like DeFi protocols. And so it's these type of things that we're thinking about. So we're trying to think about, okay, how can we get better better use cases for users, like less friction. We're kind of looking at some zero knowledge initiatives, or ZK off, to kind of have people like be able to like natively log in with social accounts and be able to interact without the chain, again, to like kind of just remove all of this kind of technological jank that I think that you kind of see on a regular basis in Web3. So yeah, so I think we're pretty excited about some of these changes in direction, or at least, or like like new innovation that we're kind of working on. So
yeah. The other thing that I wanted to bring up with respect to the game development process as we know today, as well as the Hollywood movie development process, is because these power centers are gate-kept and very centralized. What you have is this sort of politically correct pandering of a certain message in each and every one of the approved Hollywood whitelisted Marvel movies, and you see it throughout the messaging of each new movie that comes out, which doesn't optimize for the storytelling or character development, but it optimizes for the message that they're trying to propagate. Whereas now, if you apply gaming or movie development in the Web3 context, then it allows room for more talented people to enter the space and compete with the people who are encumbered by the rules of the Hollywood and gaming oligarchs. Let's just say that.
I think, look, at the end of the day, whether you're making a movie or a game, I think it's a creative process, and I think you need people that are
with talent,
passionate, and with talent, and people that are also passionate and believe in what they're building. And I think game last year that I think was everybody's favorite was Baldur's Gate 3, and that was clearly a labor of love by a very talented studio that had worked on this for 6-7 years, and that set the bar incredibly high, to the point that other studios were kind of saying, well, like we've put it so hard that we can't reach it. And I think that kind of passion and belief, when it's combined, you obviously need the ability and the talent, but I think when it's combined with the passion and the belief and the love for what you're building, I think that's always going to show through to the end user, versus a manager in a room
in a giant corporation,
and saying, okay, does it hit these and these and these and these and these checkboxes so that we maximize audience? I think people tire of that very quickly, right? So
this is why the general population who love Stellar Blade, as opposed to some other new iteration of The Walking Dead or something like that,
right? And so I think there's tremendous opportunity to get people more involved, and it's kind of rewarding these more creative, whether it'd be great to find something similar for movies, right? I'd love to see movies that are a little bit more out of the box, basically.
I would love to see crowdfunding as enabled by crypto open itself up to hopefully indie movie developers in the future, and have movie IPs become RWAs that actually have some legal binding.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Imagine if people could say, hey, here's the movie that we want to see, and kind of support it financially. So
Any housekeeping items that you want to announce to our listeners if they're trying to follow up on the Moonbeam developments?
Yeah, I would say just generally, look, come check out our website.
What is it?
Subscribe. It's moonbeam.network. Subscribe to Twitter. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff that I didn't talk about. It kind of on our roadmap. We're getting big part of it is all core protocol announcements. So we're getting a change in the next couple of weeks. That's gonna 8x increase throughput. So there's a lot of like new stuff about the roadmap. Obviously, this innovation fund, we're pretty excited about that. We are launching like a whole bunch of like initiatives to kind of promote like the DeFi ecosystem and get more liquidity in, and there'll be opportunities for people to kind of participate and so forth. So so I would just say come check us out, and I think we're pretty active right now. So I think a lot of opportunities for people to kind of interact over the next couple of months. So.
All right, fun. So how did Moonbeam achieve an 8x improvement in throughput?
So there is this thing called so there is this asynchronous backing that it's sort of it's sort of in combination with Polkadot. I'm like not the super technical guy, so might be better for somebody from product to kind of explain that. But essentially, my understanding is that like to a certain extent, it's like parallelization of transactions, right? So rather than
so they're doing they're trying to do this Solana monad thing, monad.
Right. Yeah. And so
that's Polkadot's base layer hard forking to do that.
So there is like basically like asynchronous.
Sorry, wait, hold on. I need some clarification. If Polkadot, the beacon chain or the relay chain in Polkadot speak is doing that, how would that affect the execution layer of the
so the chains, the parachains have to like basically implement support for it, right? So capability becomes available, and then the parachains have to implement support for it. By default, all parachains in Polkadot produce blocks every 12 seconds. There's now an opportunity to produce it every 6 seconds, and then I think
you guys need a hard fork to upgrade alongside.
It's not a hard fork, because like one of the cool things about Polkadot that you don't get in other ecosystems is that runtime upgrades are like kind of built into the underlying protocol. So like every parachain can basically like put like a new runtime in that gets kind of validated by that underlying relay chain. And so that is all fully on chain. So like if basically the community can vote and say, I guess theoretically, if the community could vote and say, well, we don't want asynchronous backing, we don't want this eightfold increase, and like vote it down. And so that does mean that you have like a higher speed of like upgrades, because you don't have to kind of do this whole process of like hard forking and do sort of the out of band kind of orchestration that kind of goes with that, right? So in the last 2 years, like Moonbeam's done 25 upgrades in the space of like 2 years, and that is something. I mean, we're not alone in that. That's there's nothing specific about.
Those were all soft forks.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Thank you, Siko, for coming on the show. It was great to hear from you. And Moonbeam, last time I checked up on Moonbeam, there was an integration with Osmosis, so it's really great to see that, or rather there was some kind of IBC support, I think. You know what? Never mind. I don't want to get my information wrong, but anyway.
It's okay.
Yeah, it was great meeting you, Siko, and see you in the next one.
Yeah,
good luck.
Same here. Django, thank you so much. Bye.
Welcome.